You are now entering the Mysterious Historians podcast. Puppetry, a medium man has used to share their inner thoughts, demons, and dreams since shadows first played on walls. Are they an ancient art, a conduit to evil spirits, or just dollies designed to placate children? Today I sit down with Dr. Gavin Phelps to get to the heart of all that felt. But first, I have too many totes. You could say I have totes, if you will, but I won't because I'm not a moron. Donate your excess totes to a charity of your choice today. They'll totally love it. And now, on to our show. Dr. Gavin, thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be anywhere.
It's wonderful to see you outside of your home.
Well, it's rare that I get out, and usually when I do get out, I'm usually hidden behind something or, obscured from public view. So
it's the curse of the puppeteer to always be hidden and emulate through rag and bone, if you will.
Well, what I have found in my thing is most puppeteers don't like to be seen. We don't like to be viewed by the public at all, and that's why people gravitate towards puppetry, because they go, oh, wait, I can hide behind a curtain or, a brick wall or something and still communicate with people.
So let's start with what you've just said. Why don't you want to be seen by the world?
Well, you can see me right now. I'm glad your audience can't, but nobody needs to see this, right? Like this is, I'm a pear-shaped man. Nobody needs to put their eyes on that. So I figure, why force anybody to see me? If they can look at a cute little puppet instead, then that's good.
But you weren't always a pear-shaped man. Let's start at your childhood. What was the journey to puppetry?
Anytime we were out somewhere at a toy store or whatever, I would just beg my mom. I would be, please, can I have a puppet? And most times she would say no because they're weird and they're creepy. She was very supportive in other areas, but just that one, she was just like, I can't have another puppet in the house. And I always wondered,
she was referring to your father, correct?
I've never quite figured that out, which is why I think I started studying puppets, because I was like, I want to get to the bottom with this. And it is sadly a secret my mom took to her grave. So I don't know what she meant by another puppet in the house, but it could have been my dad. I have some things that lead that, but there could have been something else. I don't know. There was a back room I wasn't allowed into. So even when she passed away, her sister came in and cleared out that room. So I never saw what was in that room.
I think someone who has a childhood without a locked back room that you're not allowed into didn't have a childhood.
True. My grandmother had a living room we couldn't go into. We could look at it, but we couldn't go into. But that back room, there were never any noises or anything coming from it, but I spent many an hour with my ear pressed up to the door when my mom was out. I didn't even touch the handle. But
so we know your history with puppetry and why you needed it. Tell me, what were the first puppets?
Well, man has sort of been making, things move that shouldn't be moving, because that's basically what puppetry is. It's like I could take this water bottle here and make it move around and personify it. So that's kind of what it is. So in the early days, men were, when I say men, I mean the people living there. I don't mean to be.
Don't worry, I'm not one of those feminists.
Okay, I just want to make sure that your audience is clear. This is, I shouldn't even be out in public. Anyway, they will make rocks move. They will make plants, shaking a bush to make it seem like there's a saber-toothed tiger in there. That was puppetry. That's what that was. But in my studies, what I have found out is, and I'm sure you know about this, there is sort of this big tradition of puppetry in the church.
Oh.
Right? And a lot of Sunday schools use puppetry. A lot of churches use puppetry to kind of bring people in and to tell parables and stuff. Well, in my research, what I found out is there is a small group of us who believe that the Bible is actually a book of puppet plays.
Fascinating.
And it is the Word of God, but these are plays that are meant to be acted out with puppets.
Well, Lot having sex with his eldest daughter makes much more sense when told with puppets.
Right. It's easier for the audience to see that sort of thing if it's, puppets.
Yes.
So,
You said something that gave me chills. Something that's moving, that's not supposed to be moving.
right.
And yet, we see a large origin in church, which to me, the first sentence sounds very demonic and terrifying. Wouldn't you expect the church to think an inanimate object moving was the work of witchcraft or of the devil?
You would probably think that, but I think the belief is, especially, coming down the hierarchy of the archbishops and all that kind of stuff, is that it's God's spirit, it's God's will moving these things. So it's certainly not something evil that people should be afraid of. It's to be embraced, and it's a way to get, if you have a fuzzy monster telling you, do this or you're going to go to hell, that's easier to take than having a big angry priest yelling in your face, if you do this, you're going to hell.
Yes.
And you're more likely to believe the monster.
Which is ironic, since so many priests are monsters. Now, we have church puppetry, but I think the most famous puppetry that people know of from the past is Punch and Judy, which is a very sexual, violent form of puppetry. Please explain what this is for my audience.
It was a morality play. It's not featured in the Bible. The person who wrote Punch and Judy was trying to get their play, like trying to pitch it as like another, like, hey, look, I can do a little morality play too. But they really ratcheted up the violence. I mean, there's some pretty violent stuff in the Bible, but this Punch and Judy thing with the baby and the crocodile and everything, it just really, really gets dark. And it was originally just a piece that was submitted for inclusion in the Bible, and it just didn't make it. So
interesting. I didn't know they were taking submissions for the Bible that late in the game.
Yeah, well, there have been these puppetry organizations, like even now we have the Puppeteers of America. We have UNIMA, which is the worldwide organization of puppeteers. But these have been around forever, and there have been puppet organizations. It's kind of like I said at the beginning, there's always been people who don't want to be seen by the public, but they want to get their message out. And that's what it is. All these writings, there's several, the Magna Carta, it was originally a puppet play. It's probably the most boring puppet play you could ever watch. But there's even some talk that perhaps the Declaration of Independence was supposed to be acted out with puppets.
I'm sure it would have gone over much better with the British. They might have just said, no war. Right. Just take your country and run with it.
I think, and what I've kind of heard is that Ben Franklin didn't get the puppets finished in time. No. Because he was building like a whole cast of puppets. But,
classic Ben.
Yeah.
You mentioned Punch and Judy play, the crocodile, the baby. For those of my listeners who do get out, can you explain the plot of one of these plays?
Well, it usually involves a main character. This is sort of the same similar thing as in the story of the Garden of Eden. It's temptation. It is somebody who is trying to live a good life, can't live a good life, and gets horribly punished for their wicked ways. So in Punch and Judy, you have the happy family, but then the husband, he gets a little like, it's going to be done this way, and get that baby to shut up, or I'm going to, whatever. And so it's a more, just a morality play, a sort of, punishment for man. It seems that it's always kind of I guess not in the Garden of Eden story, but it's like the man who's led down the road of temptation, or this main character, and then horrible things happen to them, and that's the moral. It's never uplifting at the end.
No.
It's always, listen, if you do this, you're going to end up like Punch. Do you want to end up like Punch? No, you don't.
No.
And that's why, the word punching actually came from Punch and Judy, because you're telling when you punch somebody, you're telling them you're acting like an idiot. So you punch them, and there's, that's also something you do with your hand, that's what you do with puppets. So it just, people didn't have a lot of puppets, but they would ball up their hand and go punch,
Oh, I wish there was a character named Boundaries.
Well, you could write it and submit it. People are always looking for more of that.
You mentioned these stages, these things that puppeteers hide behind.
Mm-hmm.
Now we fast forward to arguably the most famous puppeteer that has ever existed, Jim Henson, who invents a different way of puppeteering.
Yes.
Elaborate.
up to that point, there have been puppets on television. But Jim Henson, those puppets on television were always hidden behind something, as we said. So like a stage or a frame. The most famous one is kind of Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. They were in a puppet stage, and the camera was filming the puppet stage. But Jim Henson said, I want to get the puppets closer to the people. And how do I get them closer to the people? And he said, what if we use the frame of a television as a puppet stage? So that square of the television becomes the square of the puppet stage that these people will see at churches or Renaissance fairs or wherever, and that'll bring the puppets closer. And so we can get people on the track to morality by getting them closer. If you look at his show Fraggle Rock, it was all about bringing peace. It was a big morality thing. Like this is how you need to behave, and this is how everyone will get along. So he really wanted to bring the puppets closer to the people, and that's what he did.
Are all these classic puppet shows, puppeteers, all moving towards morality? Do we have any anarchists in the mix?
Sure. You always have people who kind of try and push the boundaries, do different things. If you look at Madam, Waylon Flowers and Madam was very ribald,
An alcoholic.
Sometimes I couldn't watch those. I start blushing,
Oh, Gavin, were you a filthy child? Oh.
Do you mind if can I just duck down under the table here?
Sure.
Okay. All right, we can continue the conversation now.
I'm very uncomfortable speaking to your hand, so I'd prefer if I could speak to your face.
Okay, all right. I needed a moment. I'm sorry.
No,
I won't make eye contact.
We were discussing Madam and how she was sort of a bawdy, sexy, alcoholic puppet.
Right. She was trying to lead everybody away from these, sort of morality teachings. And, all right, I've watched a few of them, and I like them. And I don't know what to think about that. And I'm sorry that I lied earlier and said that I didn't watch them, because I've watched as many as I could find.
It's okay. Lamb Chop, friend or foe?
Friend. Lamb Chop is always very sweet, always very... I don't know about the rest of her pals. Some of her pals, they get a little bit... but Lamb Chop was always straight and narrow. A very good friend. And went through a little bit of a weird voice change. I'm not exactly sure what happened with that. But you kind of find this with puppets. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but it's... if you look at Kermit, his voice has changed a couple times. Crow from Mystery Science Theater, also another puppet. His voice has changed a few times. So it's very... I don't know what happens. I don't know why that sort of happens.
Well, they're not real things. Humans are operating them, and humans change and transform.
Right. But, I just think... I don't know. It shows a lack of dedication. If you have a voice for a puppet, the voice should stay the same and never change. Ever.
But what if the original voice isn't good? Early Kermit, early Miss Piggy, these are, they're rough. They're not particularly polished performances.
Well, I think that I understand that voices grow, but it almost seems like other people are doing the voices. Like if you go out onto, you go to Hollywood and Vine, right? Or
yes.
And you say to somebody like, "Can you do a Kermit the Frog impression?" Everyone has a Kermit the Frog impression, and but it just seems that Kermit's voice has changed so much that it's almost like it's a different person doing it.
Well, isn't it a different person? In fact, haven't at least two different people have done Kermit since Jim Henson?
I'm gonna have to look into that, because I don't know if that's. To my knowledge, it's always just Kermit. And I don't know. I don't know what. I'll have to look into that and get back to you.
Look it up after I'm gone.
Yeah.
But no, don't. Let's not pull out any kind of phone and learn any kind of news right now. Now, before we move into the present tense with puppetry, I want to discuss these other forms of puppetry that are often confused. Marionettes. And ventriloquist dummies, or they're also known as vent dummies.
Vent figures, vent dummies, yes.
In the know. Let's start with marionettes. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings?
I will tell you that I have used marionettes before. I will tell you I was terrified of them.
Why?
Because they just seem easy to mess up. And it just seems that it'll be very, very easy to tangle the strings, to mess it up. And the first time I held one, someone forced one into my hand. I was at the O'Neill Puppetry Conference, which is a conference that happens every year in Connecticut. And someone said, no, here, you have to. I blacked out. And when I woke up, it was all tangled. And I was like, oh, see, this, I knew this was going to happen. And they just said, no, look how easy it is to tangle. So I have used them, and I think they're fine. They seem to not have a solid ground. You know what I mean? Like it seems like their feet just kind of hover above the ground, and that always kind of weirds me out a little bit.
Yes.
But it's certainly a fine art form. And there's plenty of theaters that promote it.
This O'Neill Puppetry Conference that you speak of, that where you were forced
Yes.
to use a marionette. Now, I've heard of a lot of violence associated with puppetry conferences.
Well, Punch. It goes back to Punch, but yeah.
Yeah, I would warn any listener to check the crime statistics of any puppetry conference you're planning on going to.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to vent dummies, equally as terrifying.
I was always very afraid of ventriloquist dummies. And then one day I went to Vent Haven. Have you heard of Vent Haven?
I have not.
Okay, Vent Haven is the largest ventriloquist museum in the world. It is in Kentucky. And I just happened to be driving through there, and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do my full research, I got to look at ventriloquist figures. And I walked into the room they had, and there were, I'm not lying and I'm not exaggerating, you can look this place up online, 150 ventriloquist dummies staring back at me.
Ooh.
Yes. It was breathtaking. I blacked out again. Mm-hmm. But when I woke up, I realized, well, when I was out, none of them made any sort of advance towards me. None of them came towards me. The curator of the museum was very nice, get me a glass of water, help me up. And I realized that they're actually not so bad. Mm-hmm. And my favorite one was is this beautiful, cute little marionette, or not marionette, event figure named Lucy. And Lucy belonged to a ventriloquist who was on a boat, performing on a boat, and the boat sank, killing everyone on board. And then a trunk washed ashore with all his ventriloquist puppets in it. And Lucy was one of those puppets. And Lucy now sits in a very prominent place in Vent Haven. And she's, her clothes are a little tattered because the trunk was in the Gulf of Mexico for several years before it washed up. And she shows signs of that wear, but she's just got the most kind eyes. She's most beautiful. And I just, sitting there as I sat up from being blacked out, that's the first one I kind of made eye contact with. And she just kind of looked at me and she said, everything will be okay.
Now, did Lucy tell you this story? Did she whisper it in your ear with her creepy doll lips?
I think it was almost metaphysical. You know how people say when they were dead for 15 minutes and they floated above and they saw their body, and they looked down and they saw their body, and they may meet other beings who just communicate without communicating?
Yes.
It was almost like that. It was just and it was like in that movie Contact, where she has this big adventure, but it only lasts a second. When she comes back, she realizes. It was like that, where we had this long conversation that everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about the locked back room. Your life is fine. Everything is good. You never have to hold a marionette again. And it was so calming. And the Vent Haven has this program where you can adopt some of the ventriloquist dummies. And so you better believe every year I renew my adoption for Lucy.
Is she in the house now?
No. She stays at the museum.
Okay.
But I make regular visits and pilgrimages. She helped me write a lot of this history of puppets. She knows so much. She knows so much about history.
Does she have you do special errands for her?
Sometimes she'll say, can you drive to Tallahassee and pick up this box and then bring it to Phoenix. And I do, because she did so much for me. She told me everything's going to be okay. And she knows she can trust me because I never looked in that back room. I'm not going to look in that box.
You're never going to look in that box.
No.
Even if it's dripping. Okay, let's move on. Do you have too many small objects to carry and not enough hands? Sounds like time for a tote. At Tassie's Total Tote Terranium, you can find any size and shape of tote you need, within reason. Don't be the last one on this totem pole. And now, back to our show. We fast forward. We have Jim Henson comes in. He revolutionizes puppetry. And he definitely dominates the scene. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there are any contemporaries of Henson that have never gotten out from under his shadow?
Well, I think, unfortunately, when you talk about puppets, the first thing people think of is the Muppets, and they're certainly very, very legendary. But there's a lot of other puppetry out there, and there's a lot of people who are performing experimental puppetry. The other week I was at a puppetry festival, and I saw a wonderful production about composting. And Jim Henson never he talked. There was the trash heap, and it was kind of implied, but it was never explicitly said like, "Hey, composting could be good." And I was like, "Wow, this is a lot to think about." And the puppets were these cutout figures on the ends of long poles, And then we see, of course, the I'm blanking on her name because Lucy won't let me remember it, but it is that big, tall little girl puppet who walks around she goes from city to city and she's looking for a home, and she's this big, and it's like, first of all, you're not going to you're too big for a house.
I mean, where's she going to live?
Exactly. I want to say her name's Amelie, but that's not it. That's the movie that had no puppets in it, I don't think, because I never saw it. But anyway, so there are these other forms of puppetry. There's giant puppets, there's shadow puppets, which sometimes weird me out even more than marionettes a little bit. Because what's in those shadows, who's
nothing
hiding?
Shadows.
Exactly. And that's scary to me. But yeah, I mentioned the O'Neill Puppetry Conference. You can see so many different styles of puppetry there that it'll really make your head spin. And even things, sometimes late at night, you see things as you're walking across the field there that, you think your mind's playing tricks on you, and then it just happens to be somebody in a full body puppet running across the field, So there are people out there. It is difficult because, as I said, most people think of Jim Henson, but Jim Henson has also opened things up to everybody. People are a little bit more accepting now. And I think they would be even more accepting if they knew that the Bible was a book of puppetry plays. They'll be like, wait, all these stories that we're talking about, these are all puppets?
Because all the cool kids love things based on Bible stories.
Exactly.
You mentioned a lot about things being terrifying. Let's talk about puppetry and puppets and their place in horror. Chucky, Megan.
Right.
The boy, Brahms is his name.
Lots of ventriloquist dummies throughout the year in different, Twilight Zones and things like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think people talk about the uncanny valley and about how something is close but not 100%, human. And if you get a really skilled puppeteer who's working a puppet, you really achieve that uncanny valley where it almost becomes creepy because you're like, my brain is telling me that this is not really a talking raccoon, but it's a talking raccoon.
Yes.
And it gets very, and I know that's not human, but it gets very creepy and weird. I do think there is a bit of a stigma because I have seen some horrifying puppets in my past, and none of them, the ones you mentioned, Megan and Chucky and all of them, don't even come close, to
they
what
think
I've
they're
seen.
scary.
Yeah.
They'd be scared of the things you've seen in real life.
Yeah, they'd be poop and felt.
Let's discuss someone who I know is a big name in puppetry and you've spoken to at length, the Sid and Marty Krofft brothers.
Yes. Well, Sid and Marty Krofft, Marty recently passed, so very, very sad. But they are both wonderful. They're both innovators, and you talk about they really pioneered this full body puppet. Because when you look at something like H.R. Puff and stuff, it's a full body. It's like, sure, we could go little, like Kermit the Frog. That's great. But what about this full body experience. And like you talk about Lidsville, those talking hats that were walking around, or the banana splits, the which wasn't a Sid and Marty Krofft did the suits. They didn't do the show of the banana splits, but they made the suits, and they were really like, let's make puppets bigger and human size. And you really, I was talking to Sid Krofft about how to stage a puppet on stage. And I was like, well, I'm really worried about how this puppet's going to look on stage. And he looked at me and said, you need to build a suit. And I was like, what? And he goes, you build a giant suit, and then you put the puppet on, and then it looks like the big character is carrying the little character. And I was like, he's a genius. The man is a genius. And he's 95 years old, still going strong, still coming up with wonderful ideas like that.
What is the difference between a suit, someone wearing a Mickey Mouse suit, versus something being a puppet?
Well, again, it's you're bringing something to life that shouldn't be brought to life, right? Or that isn't real. So Mickey Mouse, as much as some people would like to believe, he's not real. But when it's someone in a suit, they're bringing Mickey Mouse to life. So I don't think that's an interesting question, because I don't think a lot of people would consider when you go to Disneyland that Mickey and Minnie and Goofy and these characters that you're seeing are puppets, but technically they kind of are, because they're bringing these characters to life. The what they like to call face characters like Belle and Snow White, those are not puppets.
No.
But anything with a hard plastic face, that's a puppet.
But one would argue possibly those characters should not be brought to life.
True, there are some and I'm sure there are some characters over the years that Disney has brought to life that they wish that they had not brought to life anymore. I can think of several examples. But,
all those racist ones.
Yes, they're changing a whole Splash Mountain ride because of it.
You mentioned a stage show. Let's discuss puppetry on Broadway. You've got your King Kongs, your Lion Kings. Thoughts, favorites, lists.
Well, I mean, it's bringing puppetry closer to the people, because now you're removing the TV screen, and so it's a little bit edgier. When that King Kong, as you spoke of, when he appears on stage, I saw that show several times, and each time, the first time you see that giant puppet come on stage, you get a little nervous because you're like, is this going to come out into the crowd?
You were removed from the theater.
Well, the first time I saw it, I did scream very loudly, and it was very hard for me to stop.
And you did punch a child.
I had to get out of that row as quickly as possible. Yeah. It wasn't a punch like we talk about where I was trying to correct behavior. It was, I need to get out of here because this is too scary. And then a year later, once the restraining order was lifted and I could go back to the theater, I was much more prepared. And that King Kong is amazing. I mean, Lion King, you just talk about Julie Taymor, all the work she did for there. And even now you find that there's these characters like the Sesame Street Muppets and Fraggle Rock who are making the transition to theater, because they realize that it's like we can get closer to the people. And
we went forward to go back.
Yeah. And as Lucy always says, get closer. That's what she always, tells me. So, always get the puppets closer to the people.
What do you think of filthy puppets, as in Avenue Q?
As long as because Punch and Judy was very filthy for its time.
But there was a morality to it.
But there was a morality behind it. So as long as there is a morality behind it, that's fine. But I think if you have somebody, like this Randy Feltface, he is just filthy, dirty. He says things that I can't even. I went to his show once, and it was much like the King Kong thing. I punched several people on the way out of that one because.
But not out of fear, out of rage.
I was very angry. Yes, they had to pull me off the stage as I was trying to strangle Randy.
And you got a petition going for a while to have him banned. How did that turn out?
Well, it really bothered me that no one else would sign that petition. Like, I signed it, and I think it was one or other two names, but they were kind of like joke names.
I said I would sign them if you could get real people to sign them.
Right, and, it's... I don't know who he is, Mr. D's Nuts. He's signed several times, but I kind of think that's not a real name. I don't know. I've looked in the phone book, and I haven't found
You still have a phone book?
Yeah. Yeah. I request it. You have to request them now. They don't just give them to you. They used to leave them on your doorstep.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I understand why no one would want a phone book.
Oh no, I like hard copy. I spend a lot of time looking at screens all day, so I like just relax in the evening reading the phone book.
Do you think there's anything that shouldn't be made into a puppet?
That's an interesting question. I think I would hate to see a puppet. People have tried, but I just don't think, I think that gets too weird. Because then I also think like the puppets wouldn't need us.
That is a profound statement.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about the idea that you yourself are a puppet? That someone is working you? Besides Lucy, obviously.
No, I've never thought of that. That's not something that I would think about.
And what is your name?
Hi, I'm Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
Hello.
What do you do, Thomas? What are your dreams? What are your wishes?
I'm a totally rad skateboarder.
Oh.
I like to skateboard for the Lord.
How old are you, Thomas?
I'm 13.
Oh. What happened when you were 13?
What happened when I was 13?
Mm-hmm.
That's when I got my first skateboard. My uncle gave me my first skateboard.
I know, but the man who operates you is much older than 13. Do you protect him?
I do protect him.
From what, Thomas?
From people like you.
All right, Thomas. I'm so sorry. I apologize. Sometimes Thomas is Lucy's brother, and sometimes he takes over.
Well, I think we'll end there.
Okay.
Dr. Gavin Phelps, any closing thoughts for my audience?
Just remember that puppets want you to do good, and that's what they really want you to do good. So when you see a puppet, just know that if you enjoy the puppet, if you're scared of the puppet, if the puppet makes you scream and run out of a theater or charge the stage in rage, that puppet just wants you to do good. So just do good.
Dr. Phelps, where can everyone find you?
Oh, well, I have a wonderful puppetry podcast.
Okay.
I would love more downloads to that because right now it's just me, like when I check to make sure that it works. It's called Let's Talk Puppets. They want to do good. And it's available. It was available anywhere, but I had an episode recently that I guess was controversial to some places and they took it down. But if you go to my website, letstalkpuppets.com, you'll be able to download it there.
Okay, are you on any kind of social media?
No, Lucy doesn't allow that.
That makes sense. And to you, dear listener, go out, move something, bring it to life, even if it's just your cold, shriveled heart. Grant, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone, this is Grant Baciocco. Grant, tell them where they can find you.
Well, if you want to follow me online, it's my Instagram is Throwing Toasters, all one word. And I actually do have a podcast about puppetry that you have been on.
I have.
And it is called Under the Puppet, and you can find that at underthepuppet.com. And I've interviewed many of the legendary names in puppetry, including Colleen Smith, on the show. And I hope no puppeteers were mad about any references I said during this show, because it's all in fun.
And you also are Toily, right? On everything. What's that handle?
Yeah, the Toily. Go
Yeah.
anywhere. Toiley. It's my talking roll of toilet paper puppet character.
You got plenty of followers. You don't need to pitch that. And if you want a more mysterious historian, it's the Mysterious Historian 666 on YouTube and the mysterious.historian on TikTok. And if you live in the LA area, on October 29th, I will be doing a show called Hutch of Horrors at Dynasty Typewriter, and there might be a creepy marionette puppet in that one.
What?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, also, Venthaven's a real place. Look it up. It's great.
Oh, yeah. I think everything you said, except for maybe some early caveman-y biblical roots, is pretty accurate, right?
Yeah. But Venthaven, and there is I think the puppet's name is Lucy. It's pretty, you got to look up pictures. It's pretty great.
Oh, my terrified. Goodbye.
Bye.